Hidden secrets leaked. Mariam speaks out against the Sultan of Brunei. Did gambling lead her to lose everything? The secrets behind the palace doors of Brunei are finally coming out, and Mariam, the former wife of the Sultan, is spilling the tea. Her revelations have been nothing short of mind-blowing. Once a symbol of luxury and power, Mariam lived a life that very few could even dream of, surrounded by so much wealth that she quite literally had the world at her feet. But now, she has revealed that it wasn't as perfect as it seemed. According to Mariam, there's a much darker side to what appeared to be a fairy tale from the outside. What she's saying could completely change how people view the Sultan and his world. In today's video, we'll discuss the hidden secrets behind Mariam's rise and fall, unpack the allegations she's making against the Sultan, and explore how one of the wealthiest royal families found itself at the center of controversy. Stick around because this story is packed with twists and surprises you won't see coming. The beginning of the end of luxury. On February 2nd, 2003, Prince Jeffrey Bolkiah, the younger brother of the Sultan of Brunei, publicly announced the end of Mariam Abdul Aziz's over 2-decade-long marriage to Sultan Hassan al-Bolkiah, one of the most influential men in the world. The announcement came as a shock to everyone. There had been no warnings, no rumors leading up to the divorce. But it wasn't the sudden end of the marriage that made headlines. It was the speed with which Mariam's royal privileges and titles were stripped away. Her esteemed titles, including Datin Paduka Seri and her role as Colonel-in-Chief of the Royal Brunei Malay Regiment Women's Company, were revoked almost immediately. Even her portraits, once proudly displayed across the kingdom, disappeared overnight from government buildings and public spaces. People couldn't stop asking, what could have gone so wrong? Why would a man who had fallen deeply in love with a former air hostess, so much so that he defied tradition and resistance to marry her, suddenly announce a divorce after 20 years together? So why was the Queen suddenly displaced? And more importantly, how would she manage to survive after losing the privileges and status she had held for over 2 decades? Who was Mariam Abdul Aziz before she became royalty? But before we get into that, let's talk about Mariam Abdul Aziz and her life before royalty. Mariam Abdul Aziz, born Mariam binti Abdul Aziz in 1956 in Brunei, didn't come from a family of wealth or high status. To build a better life for herself, she worked as an air hostess for Royal Brunei Airlines, living what could be described as an ordinary life. At the time, being an air hostess was a respected profession, offering opportunities to travel and meet people from various walks of life. It was during one of her flights that everything changed. Sultan Hassan al-Bolkiah noticed her and was immediately drawn to her. For Mariam, it must have felt like stepping into a fairy tale. The Sultan of Brunei, one of the wealthiest and most powerful men in the world, had chosen her. In 1982, despite her non-royal background, Mariam became the Sultan's second wife. Her transformation from a working-class woman to a royal consort was pretty fast. She gained titles like Datin Paduka Seri and took on prominent roles within the royal family. Overnight, she went from a modest upbringing to a life of immense privilege and influence. She regularly attended events, charity functions, and ceremonies, with her portraits displayed throughout Brunei as a symbol of elegance and respect. The Sultan's affection for her seemed limitless. He granted her titles and elevated her to one of the most respected positions in the nation. It was a dream come true. An ordinary woman becoming one of the most powerful figures in the country. What could possibly go wrong? But dreams don't last forever, and in 2003, Mariam's seemingly perfect life came crashing down. After 20 years of living at the pinnacle of wealth and power, everything she had built was stripped away in an instant. But really, how does someone go from being the Sultan's beloved wife, a mother to 4 of his kids, to losing it all? Was it love that faded, or were there deeper secrets at play? And should Mariam have felt grateful that she got out of the marriage? The divorce. For Mariam Abdulaziz, the answer wasn't just about losing her titles or her status. It was about losing everything she'd ever known for the last 2 decades. After the divorce in 2003, Mariam's life took a dramatic turn. Her 4 children, whom she had with the Sultan, remained with him. Of course, they were still to be recognized as royals. Only their mother had to bear the brunt of the divorce. Imagine being a mother and watching as the world you built with your family disappears, along with your kids. But then it wasn't just her husband, kids, and titles this supposed fallen angel lost, but it was also the social circle she once belonged to. The exclusive high society gatherings where she was once welcomed with open arms shut their doors to her. Friends she thought she had? Gone. She became an outcast in the very world where she had once reigned as a queen and was forced to retreat to a small shed. And then we haven't even discussed the money, or the lack of it. Although Mariam did receive a financial settlement from the divorce, it was definitely nothing compared to the wealth she had enjoyed during her royal marriage. For someone who had spent over 2 decades living in unimaginable luxury, managing her limited resources was a harsh adjustment. She had to figure out how to stretch what she had to make ends meet. It wasn't as though Mariam could simply return to her old life. Could you imagine the former wife of the Sultan of Brunei going back to being a flight attendant after 20 years? The idea was, of course, absurd. She didn't just lose her marriage. She was separated from her kids, stripped of all her royal privileges, her finances took a major hit, and she lost the power she once had. Honestly, how much worse could it get? But here's the big question. If this is what life looked like after the divorce, why did Mariam agree to it? Why walk away knowing things would get so much harder? Was there something about the marriage that was so bad, it made losing everything seem worth it? Well, yes, there was, but before we get into that, let's look at her life after divorce, post-divorce controversies. After her divorce from the Sultan of Brunei in 2003, Mariam Abdul Aziz found herself facing one challenge after another. Life outside the royal bubble proved to be even more difficult than she expected, and they went from bad to worse in 2007 when she fell victim to a con artist. The culprit, a fortune teller known as Mrs. Zeno, met Mariam in a London casino and quickly preyed on her naivety and vulnerabilities. Claiming to be a spiritual guide and even pretending to have romantic feelings for the divorced queen, Mrs. Zeno manipulated Mariam into handing over a whopping £2 million. When Mariam finally discovered her for the fraud that she was and took legal action, the fortune teller fought back with threats to expose private details about her previous marriage. But Mariam didn't back down, and in the end, justice was served, with Mrs. Zeno receiving a 5-month jail sentence. The whole incident just showed how someone adjusting to life outside the royal sphere could become an easy target. In the years that followed, Mariam leaned into London's high society scene, spending much of her time in casinos. Gambling became both a form of escape for her and a source of trouble. She was often seen in high-stakes gambling rooms, blowing through the rest of her fortune, and it didn't take long before people started talking. Unfortunately, she wasn't so lucky, and her debts began piling up. At one point, she even had to sell her own jewellery to clear a £1 million gambling bill. Her name gradually became associated with careless spending, and the polished, glamorous image she once had began to crumble. The chaos even extended to those closest to her. For example, her former bodyguard, Fatima Kumin Lim, reportedly suffered significant gambling losses herself, which only added to her troubles. The last straw came in 2012, when Mariam accused Lim of stealing jewellery worth a staggering £12.5 million. The whole dispute was centred around 2 diamonds and a bracelet that Mariam claimed she had handed over to Lim for safekeeping during a night out in 2008. According to Mariam, she trusted Lim to take care of the jewellery and return them without any issue. But that was not the case. Lim denied the allegations, but the evidence painted a different picture. It came out that Lim sold off the jewelry to cover her mounting gambling debts, a revelation that added even more drama to an already messy situation. What followed was a highly publicized court case, with the details splashed across headlines and everyone weighing in. After weeks of legal back and forth, the London High Court ultimately sided with Mariam, ruling in her favour. While the decision brought her a sense of justice, it didn't come without a cost. The case had dragged her personal struggles into the spotlight yet again, making her private pain a matter of public conversation. Mariam's bold revelations. It took years of pain and suffering after the divorce for Mariam to finally reach her breaking point. She had endured so much, quietly holding it together while watching her ex-husband continue to live his dream life with his first wife, while she was secluded, condemned, and cast aside. The weight of it all eventually became too much to bear. And in an interview several years later, Mariam had decided to open up about the challenges she faced during their 2-decade-long marriage. She described to the interviewer a life of isolation where she felt more like a prisoner than a partner. She mentioned how she had so often felt neglected and unheard, despite the luxury around her. Beneath the surface of her glittering royal life, turns out life wasn't truly a bed of roses after all, and all that glittered was definitely not gold. But really, who could have imagined that a woman that had the Kingdom of Brunei under her feet could have felt so isolated and treated like a puppet? Mariam revealed that the Sultan was extremely controlling, restricting her from a lot of activities that made her a shadow of herself. She might have been his queen in the eyes of everyone else, but really she was more like his puppet, and that suffocation had made her seek for the divorce. But Mariam didn't stop there. After the interview, she decided to take legal action against the Sultan of Brunei, seeking justice for what she claimed were years of neglect and mistreatment during their marriage. The details of the case were kept mostly private, but it was said to involve emotional suffering, financial disputes, and the inequalities she felt she faced compared to the Sultan's first wife. In the end, the case was settled confidentially. While the exact terms weren't revealed, it was reported that Mariam received a significant financial settlement, along with assurances for her future security. For Mariam, this wasn't just about the money, it was about finally standing up for herself after years of feeling silenced. And there you have it, the dramatic rise and fall of Mariam Aziz, and how she finally spoke the bold truth against the Sultan of Brunei. But really, what do you think about Mariam's choices? Do you think she made the right choice? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. See you next time.